They said the mountains would keep their secrets, that the fog rolling through the hollers was God's way of laying a blanket over the things man was never meant to see. But the fog doesn't keep quiet forever. Sometimes, it moves wrong. It hums. It remembers. In the winter of 1912, deep in the Appalachian ridges of eastern Kentucky, a census taker went missing. His horse was found days later, tethered to a dead oak, its eyes wide as if it had seen something no animal should understand. The man's ledger was still in the saddlebag, a list of names and ages from a settlement that didn't appear on any official map. He'd written one last note before he vanished. The children all have the same eyes. It would take decades for anyone to find out what that meant. Most people think of Appalachia back then as a place of poverty, coal dust, and hard living, and they'd be right. But underneath the grit, something older was growing. Something born not from evil, but from isolation, ignorance, and the human instinct to survive at any cost. Families cut off by mountains and superstition began folding inward. Bloodlines became loops, and somewhere in those silent valleys, fathers became uncles, brothers became husbands, and children were born into a world that could never explain itself. The locals called it the holler with no name. There were stories of laughter that sounded wrong, of faces that looked too much alike, of a church that held services in the dark. It wasn't just sin, it was structure, a system that turned in on itself so many times it forgot what was outside. When the census taker disappeared, his absence was noted, but never followed up. The mountains ate men all the time back then. Mines caved in, rivers rose, people vanished. But a rumor spread in the nearby towns about a place where no one came out right, where the children spoke in whispers, where the mothers didn't age, and the men all had the same stare. You can still find the descendants today if you know what to look for. Their family names don't appear in church records, but they're in the county archives if you dig far enough. They changed spellings, moved lines, pretended to marry into outsiders, but the truth was always written in the faces. Flattened features, pale eyes, a certain way of moving that looked like a memory more than emotion. And if you go back to the earliest birth records, 1912, 1913, 1914, you'll start to see it. The same fathers listed on multiple children from different mothers, many of whom were sisters. The same few surnames circling each other like vultures over an empty valley. There's one entry that stands out. A girl named Mary Lou, born in the winter of 1912. Mother, Sarah Collins. Father, unknown. But just 3 lines above, there's another entry. A boy named Jesse, born that same week. Father, Thomas Collins. Mother, unknown. Same house number. Same midwife's mark. It's the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. But once you notice, the pattern won't stop repeating. Unknown mothers. Unknown fathers. Houses listed twice. As if someone was trying to fill both roles, but didn't have the words for it. The midwife who signed most of those certificates, a woman named Eliza Rowe, left town 2 years later. Her letter to the county clerk is still preserved. She wrote, "They ain't got shame nor sense left. The Lord's hand don't reach that holler." When asked to clarify what she meant, she never answered. She was found dead in 1916, 30 miles west, by the riverbank. Her throat had been cut clean, but there was no blood trail. No footprints. Nothing but a rusted crucifix in her hand. What makes this story so disturbing isn't just the inbreeding itself. It's what came after, the way it shaped generations like rot beneath wood. How the children grew into adults who didn't know where their kinship ended or began. When your uncle is your father, and your cousin your sister, the meaning of family stops being moral, it becomes instinct. By 1924, the nameless holler had less than 40 residents. And yet, birth records continued. Babies kept coming, even as the family trees twisted tighter. Diseases common in royal bloodlines appeared: hemophilia, microcephaly, cleft palates. And yet, no doctor ever visited. They didn't want help. Or maybe they didn't understand that they needed it. Locals from the next valley said that when you passed through at night, you could hear singing, not hymns but something older, a kind of humming, carried on the wind like a lullaby that didn't belong to any language. Some said it was the mothers. Some said it was the mountain itself, mourning what had been done on its soil. By the time the Great Depression hit, the holler was all but forgotten. No one spoke of it, no one went near it. But the strange thing is, even after all that time, a few of the surnames began reappearing in nearby counties. Men who worked in the mines, women who married out. When asked about their families, they just say, "Up the ridge," and change the subject. There's something unsettling about that. The way history doesn't vanish. It just hides in the faces of those who don't know what they come from. Maybe that's what the census taker saw. Maybe that's why he never came back. And maybe the real horror isn't what happened in that valley, but what still might be happening in others just like it. Because Appalachia is full of places no map will show you. And the further you go into those mountains, the more you start to feel like the trees themselves are watching. Waiting. Guarding something ancient and wrong. Something that never wanted to be found. When you look at the census records, the family names repeat like echoes. Collins, Rowe, Hensley, Likens. It's like reading a prayer said over and over until the words lose meaning. Each name another step deeper into a secret the mountains refuse to give up. And if you stare long enough, you might begin to feel it too. That uneasy sense that what you're uncovering isn't history at all. It's inheritance. By 1932, the holler was nearly gone. Or at least, that's what the county records suggest. But paper doesn't rot like flesh does. And truth doesn't die just because no one writes it down. The people who survived, if you can call it that, didn't leave graves, only stories. And in Appalachia, stories can bury deeper than bones. The last confirmed sighting came from a railway surveyor named Edwin Marr. He was sent to map potential routes for a new mining line through Breathitt County. He wrote in his field journal, what little remains of it, that he'd met a family living higher than any others, their speech thick, their eyes pale, and their customs unlike anything I've seen. His notes end abruptly. The next page is stained, warped from moisture. Only 2 words are legible. The child. When they found his camp 2 months later, all his tools were gone. His compass was buried under stones in a perfect circle. No sign of struggle, no sign of travel. The locals said the mountain took him. The officials said he ran off. But if you ask the old-timers who still remember that name, they'll tell you. He saw something that couldn't exist, and the mountain made sure no one else would. The children from that holler weren't like other children. That's not just rumor. It's documented. Their physical deformities were one thing, but it was their minds that unsettled people most. Teachers from neighboring towns who tried to educate them wrote about a kind of knowing in their eyes, like they understood more than they should, not in words but in silence. One teacher, a woman named Hattie Bell, described a boy who could recite the Lord's Prayer backward but didn't know his own age. When she asked who taught him that, he just said, "Pa and Uncle both did." But his father had been dead 2 years, and his uncle, according to the records, was also his grandfather. Over time, even the government lost interest. Poverty programs, census updates, medical surveys all skipped the area. It's almost like the holler vanished by design, folded into the mountain's skin. But it didn't die. The families moved, blended in, became something else. If you go through marriage records in Clay and Perry counties after 1940, you'll start noticing something subtle. The same handful of names, again, always interlinked, always moving a little further west, as if trying to outrun the memory. But history doesn't forget blood. It just disguises it. There are photographs too, faded and unmarked, hidden in museum archives and private collections. You can see the resemblance even across decades. The same long faces, the same light-colored eyes that never quite focus. In one photo, taken in 1953, a child stands at the edge of a dirt road, barefoot, staring into the lens. Her features are off somehow, as though 2 faces tried to occupy the same space. On the back, in trembling handwriting, "Collins girl, found wandering. No one claimed her." If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you hide it or face it? Because what happened in that hollowed-out corner of Kentucky wasn't just isolation. It was an entire ecosystem built on secrecy. And that secrecy becomes ritual over time. The stories that children grow up hearing, The prayers whispered to no god in particular. The belief that outsiders bring sickness, that blood should never leave the mountain. Some oral histories mention of Father Thomas. Not a priest, but a patriarch, the man said to have begun it all. The first to keep blood clean. No church recognized him, but his name appears in birth ledgers from the early 1900s. Always as father, never as husband. He was believed to be both the father and grandfather of most of the holler's earliest children. A traveler once wrote that he saw a carving over one of the cabins. In us, the circle stays whole. The letters were burned into the wood with such force they had sunk into the grain. Nobody knows what became of that cabin, but in photographs of the ruins, the phrase is still faintly visible. By the 1960s, when modernization began creeping into the mountains, roads, electricity, outside churches, some of the younger ones tried to leave. But you can't leave a place that's written in your body. One of them, a man named Eli Collins, enlisted in the army. He served in Vietnam, came home in '72, and was found hanging in his father's barn 6 months later. The note he left said only, "They all had my mother's eyes." The coroner called it trauma. The townsfolk called it madness. But the old people in the ridge towns whispered that Eli had gone back to the holler, seen what was left, and brought something with him. See, when a family forgets who's kin and who isn't, the word sin stops meaning much. The mind breaks down the same way the body does. And that's what makes this story so haunting. Not just the physical deformities, but the moral collapse, the slow, unspoken decay of boundaries that define what it means to be human. The mountain didn't punish them, protected them. The fog, the isolation, they weren't curses. They were walls. And as long as those walls stood, the secret stayed buried. But walls crumble. Roads come. Outsiders pry. And by the time the 20th century turned, people began to dig. Journalists, historians, curiosity seekers. And with every shovel of dirt they turned over, they found less about the people and more about themselves. About what any of us might do if we were trapped long enough, alone enough, desperate enough. Maybe the Real story isn't about incest at all. Maybe it's about what happens when isolation rewires morality. When a community starts answering only to itself. The further you go into those records, the more the names blur together until you realize there's no beginning or end. Just one continuous bloodline, stretching through time like a serpent eating its own tail. And if you think that couldn't happen again, look at any forgotten place in America today. Poverty, addiction, disconnection. These are just modern words for the same sickness that took root in those hills. People still disappear in Appalachia. Some are found. Some aren't. Every now and then, a hiker reports strange sounds. Children's laughter carried through mist, too distant, too high up to be real. Locals say it's just the wind. But the wind doesn't whisper names that died a century ago. They say the last of the Collins blood died out in 1987. But that's not true. Not really. 'Cause blood doesn't die, it migrates. It moves through veins, across county lines, through marriages and new last names. And somewhere out there, a child was born who didn't know that every breath he took was carrying a century of silence. In the spring of 1988, a social worker in Lexington was assigned to a routine adoption file. A boy, age 9, found wandering along a county road near the old Breathitt border. Malnourished, nonverbal, terrified of mirrors. He wouldn't eat unless the lights were off. Wouldn't sleep unless someone hummed. That same low humming sound the surveyors once wrote about. The doctor who examined him noted his DNA markers didn't match any known family in the state system. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was his eyes, pale gray, almost translucent, like thin ice over running water. He was given a name, a new identity, a foster home. But the records stopped 2 years later. No cause listed. Just a single phrase, stamped in red, case transferred. Transferred where? No one knows. The file ends there. That's how it always ends. Abruptly. No closure, no trace. The mountains don't give back what they've taken. They just release echoes when they want to remind us they're still there. Somewhere along the way, people stopped calling it a curse and started calling it heritage. Appalachian pride, they said. Strong roots. Old families. But behind the romanticism, behind the mountain music and the folklore, there's a kind of darkness baked into the soil, a reminder that isolation is never harmless, that the line between survival and surrender is thinner than a thread. If you drive through eastern Kentucky today, you'll see abandoned cabins buried under vines, chimneys still standing where homes once breathed. And if you stop long enough, you'll notice the silence. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of memory, the kind that listens back. There are still people who remember the holler, not by name but by feeling. They talk about seeing strange lights up past the old mine road, hearing babies crying where no houses stand. Hunters say they've found footprints too small and too many to belong to one person, always in pairs, always circling. And sometimes, when they follow the prints, they find shapes carved into trees, circles intersecting circles worn deep by time. It's the same mark once seen on the Collins cabin door, the same message burned into the boards. In us, the circle stays whole. Maybe that's all the story ever was, a circle. People born into secrecy, living in shame, dying in silence, only to be rediscovered by those who can't look away. But the horror isn't just in what they did. It's in how easily we can forget that they were human. Not monsters, not demons, just people who didn't know another way to live. When the world cuts you off long enough, morality becomes memory, and memory fades like light in the fog. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real reason the census taker disappeared. Because once you see it, really see it, you start to understand that what happened in those hills wasn't just an accident of geography. It was a reflection, a mirror of everything civilization hides when it looks away. There's a reason the story keeps resurfacing. Why people still whisper about the pale-eyed families. Why archives still redact names. It's not because of shame. It's because bloodlines don't end. They just disperse. Maybe the person next to you carries one of those names. Maybe you do. There's an unsettling thought, isn't there? That inside your own ancestry, there could be a name that vanished from public record for a reason. That your great-grandfather's silence at the dinner table wasn't stoicism, but fear. That somewhere back in your own line, a door was closed and never reopened. In the end, the mountain didn't need to hide anything. The people did that for it. Every generation that moved away carried just enough of the story to make sure no one could ever piece it back together fully. Until now. Until someone went digging through archives and found a ledger with a note scrawled in the margin. The children all have the same eyes. When you close your eyes tonight, think about that. Think about the faces that never made it into photographs. The names that never left the ridge. The voices that hummed lullabies to themselves because there was no one left to sing. The mountains remember. They always do. And every fog that rolls through, every low hum that drifts between the trees, carries pieces of that story. Not to frighten us, but to remind us. That blood remembers what the mind forgets. If you ever find yourself in those hills, and you hear something, faint laughter, a voice calling from beyond the ridge, don't follow it. Don't go looking for the holler that no longer has a name, because some truths don't want to be found, and some bloodlines don't want to be disturbed. The fog will settle, the earth will breathe, and the mountains will keep their secrets just a little while longer. But somewhere, in some forgotten house, under the quiet hum of wind through the trees, a child with pale gray eyes is still waiting.